Hey everyone, this is Kate from the Your Courageous Life podcast, and this is still the Your Courageous Life podcast, but I am partnering with my friend Andy Sewell for a special 9-part series focusing exclusively on lessons from my book, The Courage Habit. Listen in as we talk about how you can apply the psychology of courage and the neuroscience of habit formation to your life to create lasting behavioral changes. If you've ever wondered how someone can learn the skill of being more courageous in their life, this special Courage Habit series that I'm embedding within the larger Your Courageous Life podcast is it. It's going to have a little Courage Habit themed intro, outro, but again, it's still the Your Courageous Life podcast, just a special little 9-part series where we do a deep dive into the courage habit and how you can apply it to your life. Let's get started.
Welcome to the Courage Habit Podcast, an exploration of the Courage Habit, the book and program designed to break the fear-based habits holding you back and replace them with the courage-based habits to enjoy the life you want. The Courage Habit was written by Kate Swoboda. She's a life coach, creator of YourCourageousLife.com, and director of the Courageous Living Coach Certification Program. In this limited series podcast, I'll be asking her questions about the book and her experiences teaching her techniques.
And he's Andy Sewell, an audio producer who has started a new career after 2 decades of corporate work. Andy is an amazing storyteller, he's ferociously curious, and he's someone who has read The Courage Habit. So he was the perfect person to ask about hosting the Courage Habit podcast. You can learn more about Andy at audioephemera.com.
Each episode of the series is a continuation of our conversation. If this is your first time listening, please subscribe to the podcast so you can start from the very beginning. Thank you for joining us, and let's get back into the conversation.
So, Kate, one thing I wanted to reach out to you with is about accountability. And I've had the experience where I've been lucky enough to find people that are both in my creative world who can comment on my work product and give me tips that are more industry related. And I obviously have a community of people who are just supportive of me generally as a person. But I've also been working to find more accountability groups that can kind of combine the two. And one thing that has been helpful is meeting with people that are from a diverse set of disciplines and sharing something with them, and then getting their opinions and using that as input on moving forward. We call it masterminds. I think you're familiar with it. And it's worked out pretty well. But I want to get your description of a mastermind for our listeners.
Okay. So first of all, for the most part, everybody hates the word mastermind in general, because it sounds too much like, Dr. Evil masterminding a plot. But in essence, mastermind group is a group of people coming together and saying, we are going to be some parts each other's coaches, consultants, think tank, bouncing ideas off of one another. And the group usually determines at least some level of norms at the start, although most masterminds that I have participated in are extraordinarily informal. I'm actually in 2 right now. You can find paid masterminds that have a leader that is really running the mastermind with a programmatic approach. Like, this is what we're all doing together. And the think tank bounce ideas off of one another aspect of things is still there. But the leader is saying, okay, first let's tackle this aspect. Then let's tackle this other aspect. So I've had a mastermind before that I've run called the Sovereign Experience. Others that I've participated in. But more than likely, the person listening to this, it would be an informal kind of a thing where you're going to a couple of different people. And I can talk more about what I think makes for a successful mastermind, because there are a couple things that I think are pretty critical. But talking to a couple of different people, can we get together this day, this time each month? And here is the format. And typically in the informal mastermind, the format is somebody is a timekeeper, 10 minutes for you to share about either the topic at hand or whatever you want to share about. We give you some feedback, 10 rotate, we go to the next person. So it's not like the whole hour becomes about you in the hot seat, although that is one other structure of a rotating hot seat month to month. Typically what people like is a time limit. Here's how much time you get to check in, and then get feedback. And then we go on to the next person, almost like workshopping a piece of art or a piece of writing.
Yeah. Yeah. And does it matter? You had said a few people. I was wondering if the composition, either in the number or the diversity of perspectives or the projects people are doing, is it helpful if everybody's the same kind? Is it helpful if there's a balance of art versus more practical disciplines?
So what I would say, at least in the coaching world, which is the world I come from, or the entrepreneurial world really, is that I don't think it would be as effective to have a mastermind where the overall balance of members was much farther ahead in platform building than one particular member. I'm sure there are exceptions to that rule, but just in general, if one person is really at the beginning of, just to use entrepreneurial examples, what is search engine optimization? How should I structure a launch if I'm launching a program? How am I going to find my first clients? And then if it's a 5-person mastermind, if one person's in that place and 4 other people are like, yeah, I'm working on my second book deal. I just got contacted by my local TED affiliate to do a local TEDx. They're just in really different places with really different concerns. So I don't think that works as much. And I've heard some people say you want to get people who are more like-minded in masterminds in terms of business approaches. Others who have said, no, get diversity. I tend to think the more important thing to search for in masterminds is actually the value around getting together and being accountable in the first place. Like, to me,
which is the purpose of the group. Which is the purpose of the group initially, is to be disciplined and to be accountable.
Yes, but people have different definitions of what accountable means. Like, for me, it's on a spectrum. For me, I'm pretty hardcore. I'm like, like, you show up unless you are sick or somebody close to me has died. Like, I show up for that no matter what. I recently was sick and had to cancel an appointment with you, and needed to cancel an appointment with my mastermind because my throat was not, I couldn't really talk, and I was coughing and blowing my nose so much that, like, it would have been really hard for me to stay focused and listen, but I still asked for something from my mastermind. I've been in masterminds before where somebody said, I just had a really heavy work week, I need to cancel. To me, that's BS. You don't cancel things because you didn't organize your time and your priorities in such a way that you could show up. There are a hell of a lot of people, though, who would hear me say that and go, God, Kate is such a bitch. Give somebody a break. So it's like, that's why I'm saying the values have to be really aligned on the very center. I mean, you start a mastermind or join one to have accountability. And if on a fundamental level, there is no accountability or not a shared view of what accountability looks like, then to me, it's chaos. So those masterminds, I got pretty irritated and didn't continue because things started to happen like, out of 5 people, 3 people bailing for things that were not emergencies, or out of 5 people, somebody, I have this thing I want to do, friends visiting. So can we switch up when our call's going to be? And instead of always doing it on this day, we're just this one time and it would just feel kind of like I'm prioritizing to be accountable to this group, and like switching it up and last minute cancellations and people not showing up for things that are just like, just don't, got other stuff going on. Like, that is, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan. What's the point of calling it accountability if it is not by definition accountability? And I also, in the 2 masterminds I'm currently in, I've had to just decide when other people do that, because those things do happen, they have a different value around it. And as long as it doesn't get too crazy, okay, I can roll with this. But, we have a basic agreement about what accountability looks like.
And I think in a real base term, the reason for the group is for everybody to contribute for the benefit of every individual member. So a slowness of participation, or if it's deprioritized over something else, you really are not contributing what you've committed to the group. And the whole point of it is to hold everybody accountable for their commitments, whether it's this group or their projects as a whole. So I could see that's indicative of maybe this isn't the right mix of people for this particular mastermind.
Yeah. So it's like, everybody doesn't have to be in the exact same place per se. Let's just use the example of a parenting mastermind, which probably people would just call it a parenting group, even though it's really the same format. But you could have kids of all different ages, and there's a lot of value to that. Because the person who has 2 kids can give some insight to the person who only has 1. The person who has the newborn is going to gain insight from the people who have already had a newborn. The person who is going through a divorce can lean on the other. So it's like there's all kinds of scenarios that surround parenting. But if out of, again, X number of members, 75% of them, I can't make it. Can we reschedule? It's not a good time. It's just like, well, then what's the point of even calling it a group or a mastermind? Because it's just getting so like all over the place that, it's not even cohesive anymore. So that to me is the biggest thing, is really find those people who they want to show up. They have a similar value around showing up. And then I'd say the other thing to really get clear on, when, especially if it's a mastermind where you are wanting some feedback, if you're actually wanting it, not just for the accountability of I'm going to give you the report of what I've been up to with my most courageous self, not just the report of where I am emotionally or with a project or developing a new business or whatever the purpose of the mastermind is going to be, but also a shared conception of what giving feedback looks like. And really having an open and transparent conversation. Probably for most success, it would need to sound something like, are we all in agreement that when someone gives feedback to somebody else, you take what you like, you leave the rest? The person who's giving the feedback has no attachment, no well, is Andy going to take my feedback now and iterate on it? Because if he doesn't, what was the point of me even giving it? And then you, Andy, when somebody gives you feedback, especially if it is really direct feedback about what they feel you ought to do, you are making a commitment to say, I take what I like and I leave the rest. And if that person's feedback that I could be doing 10 more things than I am doesn't feel like a match for me, I don't make it personal. I don't decide, oh God, this jerk. It's like I'm in the mastermind to hear feedback that is supportive some of the time, and other times really challenging. And that's part of why I'm in this. So I think having a shared value around feedback giving can really help the mastermind to not have conflict, to keep it together, basically.
So does that mean that somebody who wants to participate in a mastermind, I should probably look inside and see what I'm looking for? If I'm looking for a bunch of attaboys and no criticism, this obviously isn't going to challenge me, and it is not going to be useful for everybody participating. But also, I could see myself shying away if it is a lot of critical of you're doing it wrong, and this doesn't, reflect great work. This is amateur or something like that. I'm assuming the group has the discussion ahead of time, just casually, and says, this is what we're all looking for. And once they agree, then everybody feels like they can contribute the same.
Yeah, I think that's accurate, and it's that thing we've talked about in other episodes of, paying attention to the little moments. It's like, who are the people who you have conversations with them and they always say something thought provoking, or there's always a question that you're left with that has you go, oh, okay. I'm in a mastermind group right now with somebody else who also runs a coach training program. Some people would say, oh, well, what about competitiveness? And I say, I'm happy to help her succeed because she's a different person than I am and is going to run her program differently, and vice versa. And if somebody's not a fit for my program, happy to pass it along to her. And I believe vice versa, that's true as well. It also helps that we open enrollment for our 2 coach training programs at different times of year. So there are places where you can step on one another's toes and it's not a match in that way. But I think that masterminds add a lot of value to things. And to be honest, I find the most value not really from the strategic stuff. Like, if I'm trying to think of what I last came to my program with. I mean, I think my topic in both of my masterminds recently has been any tips, tricks, strategies, etc., for converting what previously has been in-person facilitation to virtual facilitation. And I have a lot of experience with virtual facilitation, but I've got a big event coming up, and I really want to make sure that I'm covering all my bases here. So that strategic help is really helpful. What's more helpful is having a crew of people who get it when I say, and I'm afraid, like, what if it's not quite the same for the entire duration of this program because it was not in person as a kickoff? And I know that that's an unfounded fear in so many ways, but I want that community, that crew of people who get it, who are going to go, it's not going to be the same. You can still make it great. It'll be great in a different way. And getting those reminders, I find that really helpful.
So it's clear to also make it a safe space for people to say what they need to say. In the same way that maybe I'm not looking for a solution to this. I just want to air this thought I have or this fear that I have. And by naming it to this group and talking a little bit about it, that's started the process of allowing to overcome that and go forward with it. You don't need somebody to tell you that sucks, that feels bad. You want somebody to agree with you and to be supportive going forward, not adversarial.
Yeah. And this is part of getting the shared ideas about these things from the get-go, because in both of my current masterminds, feel very fortunate. This doesn't happen, but there's a phrase in the coaching world called coaching without permission. And so it would look something like, if I say, so I'm afraid of this, and then somebody started going, if somebody were to start going, so Kate, what's underneath that fear? What kind of stories, limiting, let's do a redo, please. If they start trying to do an exercise, it's like, no, I'm not saying I want you to coach me right now. I'm wanting feedback. I'm wanting a mix of friend and consulting, a mix of you are my friend, and also you might have a perspective or expertise that I don't have. If I want to do coaching with you, I'll enter into a one-on-one coaching relationship with you aside from this group. Sometimes people request coaching. They'll say, can I get a little coaching around this? And that's fine. But it's, again, it's all coming from this place of we're talking about what it is that we need.
And is there room in a typical mastermind to reassess that? Because I can imagine for myself, my needs might change. My focus won't change, but maybe my discrete needs might change. Does the group have time to kind of readjust and say, here are the new boundaries, or we're readjusting for this particular person because they're needing more or less?
Sure. Absolutely. This is not a mastermind group, but it's related. My husband has actually taken place in men's teams for, 15 years. So he's part of, in your area, the East Bay, it's EBCOM, East Bay Community of Men. And the Mankind Project is probably more well known as a men's group, all over the United States, at least. I don't know about elsewhere. He has a weekly meeting with his men's team. He's been doing it since before we were married. He has quick check-in calls with just kind of what he's up to in his life with all 5 other members of his team. And then they meet once a week, on Wednesday nights, actually. So they'll be meeting tonight. It's a Wednesday when we're recording this. So, this has been going on for quite some time. And, it's just, their purpose for coming together is really just men supporting other men. I always joke to people, I didn't even know that there were hot woke Italians in existence until I met my husband. Literally, it's a group of men who identify as men who are also very aware of patriarchy and gender conditioning and are like, F that. We need to redefine what it means to be, air quotes, a man, and support one another in that. So they talk about money, they talk about sex, they talk about relationships, and it's a similar format to what I'm describing in terms of the practicalities of a timer and checking in and all that a mastermind group would have. So you can call it a group, you can call it a mastermind, you can call it accountability buddies if it's just two people, all kinds of stuff.
I like how the constant theme of all of these is really just boundaries, which is something that I think is work that people can always do. It's always something you can just kind of check in with, but it's always about boundaries. What are you expecting from something? What do you need from something? And also, where are the lines that aren't helpful and aren't beneficial for people participating?
Yeah, boundaries and self-responsibility. Because again, if I don't like the feedback I'm getting from someone or my mastermind in general, if I'm taking it personally and it's becoming this whole dramatic thing, then it's like, well, how's this going to be a success? Everybody's annoyed with everybody. So
one thing that I also have been thinking about is not only checking in with people on the groups and going through in your progress, but is also that moment where things break down. And you and I before have talked about this, calling the messy middle. And I think you have some other words to describe this, but that's happened a lot. Actually, I've read your book twice, and in both experiences, I was definitely in different places. So there is value in readdressing it. And I have made some big changes on how I go through my steps when I'm trying to figure out what the next step is. But I often find myself in this stasis, this messy middle where maybe a lot of effort went one way and it just didn't get to where I thought it was, and I feel stuck. Can you talk about that moment? I sometimes when I feel that, I feel I'm the only one doing it. It can't possibly be true, but it still doesn't take away from the feeling that, I'm just in the wrong direction, the wrong place, and I'm really far off the path.
Yeah. So messy middle. Okay. So the thought I have is that for the most part, people start out a new journey full of potential. It's like big blue skies, sunshine. It's going to be great. I'm kind of scared, but here we go. It's going to be awesome. And I could parallel it to the process of running the marathon, the ubiquitous marathon metaphor. You start out, starting line, the 10 count happens. There's all this collective effervescence. Everybody's cheering. Your legs are fresh and you're like, this is it. It's race day. By the way, I've never run a marathon. Of all the crazy, really intense endurance things I've done, I have yet to run a marathon. Half marathon, yes, but not an actual full marathon. So it's really exciting and great and awesome and all that good stuff. And then there is this point that runners describe that's usually about 3/4 of the way through the marathon. Because at first, mentally, most runners pace it as, let me just get to the halfway point. And then once you get to the halfway point, it's like you get this little like second wind of, how awesome am I? I'm more than halfway through with this freaking thing. So, and I can totally tell you that was me, like with triathlon and, other things, like how awesome am I? But then it's 3/4 of the way through and now you're really tired and the end is not right around the corner. And that's when runners hit what is commonly referred to as the wall. And the wall is actually a physiological thing. It's when you are running really low on glucose. So your brain is starting to go, hey,
Yeah.
I'm giving you all the glucose I've got so you can keep moving your legs. I'm starting to run low on glucose. You need to do something here. And other things too. Salt is probably something else. Sometimes water, depending on how someone hydrates. But the essential thing to note about this metaphor of the marathon and hitting the wall and the lack of glucose and maybe the lack of salt and, things like that is it's a resource issue. It's a resource issue. So in those moments when we're in the messy middle and it feels like it's all gone to shit, those are the times when it's like, what are my resources? I love the acronym that is used in the 12-step communities, HALT, hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. So it is said that you're most likely to break your sobriety or at least consider breaking your sobriety in the recovery community when you are hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. So that is a check that's given in 12-step communities. Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? What do I need to do to meet those needs? So in the messy middle, that's what I tend to find. It's like there's this space between where we were and where we want to go. we have left the comfort zone and all the things that we knew. We are in a new space and we don't actually know necessarily how to resource ourselves in this new space. It's a tricky thing. So the messy middle is, if we go back to the marathon metaphor, is sort of two parts. If you're running a marathon, you know about the wall in advance because you've talked to other runners. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to carry packets of goo with you or have Gatorade at the next aid station. You're basically trying to prevent the wall from hitting because the messy middle is there. Sometimes runners find that no matter what they do to prevent it, it hits anyway. And so then it's, what is my strategy to get through this so that I don't give up? Apply all that to the business of being human. So it's two parts. What can I do to avoid falling into a messy middle where I feel really stuck if it is avoidable? And if I do, despite all my best efforts or whatever happens, I get into it, what are my resources to get out of it?
So when you are at this moment and you feel like you need the resources, it can often feel like it's hard to pause. And so I like this idea of stopping and just affiliating it with resources. My experience has been, it feels like you're lost. It feels like, and maybe this makes sense in the marathon, that you don't know what you're doing. Your body's just kind of doing what it's been doing for the last, in my case, several hours. But and you have to keep doing it. But how do you reach out for those resources? How do you have the kind of wherewithal to stop and look around? It feels very mired. It feels very lost.
I think this is where, I mean, to me, and it sounds like from the things you've been sharing with me, this is where the concept of creating courage as a habit, the courage habit, is what sets you up to do a little better when those times hit. So it's the prep work. And then there is returning to those habits. You know what I'd love to actually put this into the context of is the pandemic, because I think we're at the wall with the pandemic as we record this right now. And I think this is a lot of people are hitting this. So pandemic, you start out and you think, okay, we're going to shelter in place for a couple of weeks. We're going to flatten the curve and life is going to go back to normal. Hospitals won't be overloaded. And then there's, this pandemic thing is harder than I thought. We're not flattening the curve. We're actually going to be like in this for a while. And then we get to summer and it's kind of like, well, at least we can be outside. You know, it's summer. Let's just try to have a little bit of normalcy, And then it's fall and it's And then, oh my God, it's winter. We're all going to have to go back inside again. We can't go to movie theaters. We can't go to restaurants. We can't go to And then vaccine is available. Oh my God. So this is parallel now to the marathon is more than halfway over. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's a thing that we can get to that's probably going to make everything better. I say probably because I'm trying not to get too rigidly attached to expectations myself around this process, you know, not being a soothsayer or having a crystal ball handy for how this will all pan out. But in essence, when people talk about pandemic fatigue, and I want to make sure I'm clear. Do I think that we still have a responsibility to wear masks and all of that? Of course, yes. I think we need to, keep doing it. Do I emotionally understand people just hitting this place with pandemic fatigue where they're like, I can't freaking take it anymore? Yeah, I emotionally understand that place. I've had those moments. So it's like, here we are and we're in the messy middle. All of my habits around working out, drinking plenty of water, reaching out to community, meditating daily, accessing the body, reframing limiting stories, all of that. That has all meant that my pandemic experience has not been nearly as hard as I think it otherwise would have been if I had not put those habits into place. And then when I have those days or weeks, where it's all like, oh my God, the news headlines, I can't even take it. And all of that. It's kind of like, okay, I don't feel like having the salad right now, but I'm going to, because I know that if I go to the sugar, which is what I want for my comfort food, then I'm going to crash from that, be really irritable or tired, and then it's worse. I don't feel like working out, but I'm going to, because I know that if I don't, it gets worse. I don't feel like reframing this thought, but if I don't, it just gets worse. I don't feel like turning to somebody and saying, hey, I'm in it right now. Cause I'm human. I'd love it if everybody just thought that my life was peachy keen and I never had problems. But here's the moment where I'm messing it all up, or I'm just completely melting down over a silly software issue or something. Actually, here's the truth. I'm struggling. Can I hop on the phone with you today? Those are the resources that we all have to turn to when we are in the messy middle. It's not that it changes. It's that the more you create the habit in advance, the less likely you are to have the downward spiral. And then it's when I have the downward spiral, got to turn to the tools.
It's almost planning for this is likely to happen. You need to keep a little resources on the side or whatever your go-to is. For me, I sometimes think it's a little mystical, but meditation, just stopping in the middle of whatever it might be to take a little bit of a break seems to get me back to that moment where I can make a clear choice. And that's worked out well. I'm not an often user of the reaching out to somebody. I tend to kind of hovel and hide a little bit before I reach out, which is something I'm trying to break, or at least change. But I don't plan ahead as well. I get caught up in the moment where something's working out, something's exciting. And then suddenly I look around and realize I'm really far away from where I thought I was. And that can feel embarrassing. So the reaching out part is connected to an internal ego struggle. I think that I have, at least.
Oh yeah. Ego struggle. Great label for sure. We have these identities that we construct, and the dominant narrative in the capitalistic machine is that the more bright and shiny your life is, the more love you'll get. So we all get conditioned into, we want to be bright, shiny people. I don't know that this exists in the audio engineering communities or industry, but I will definitely tell you that in the helping professions like life coaching, the pressure is there to look like you have it all together at all times. And one of my, I think the blessings of the direction my own work took on very, very early was that I just saw that it was a sham pretty quickly. And it was like, no, you're not going to be fearless. Like, there's no part of me that's going to like set up a marketing thing. Like, come work with me for coaching. You'll be fearless and you'll be courageous. Like, no. You'll still be afraid, but courage is also a skill that you can learn. That takes some of the pressure off. But I definitely know there are a lot of people who maybe are trying to help people experience more joy in their lives, who are really feeling the pressure. And man, my heart really goes out to therapists, social workers, and other licensed mental health care workers in the community who are, I think of them often because the dominant refrain is, hey, everybody in the world, if you're really, really struggling, you got to with mental health issues, like serious mental health issues, you got to reach out to a therapist for help. Well, I mean, the therapists and the social workers and all of that. I mean, during a pandemic, during all of this, they're at home dealing with the pandemic too, and not having childcare either. And they are struggling to support the people they support right now. So it's a tough thing, it's a very tough thing.
I think in the audio world, and I think it's similar to other creative arts, you have a balance between meeting your client's needs, which sometimes can be really direct. The client can say, I like this, I don't like this. Great direction. You can go back in and make some changes and then deliver them something that they're happy with. And that always feels like, great, I've accomplished my goal. I was given some more direction, and that solved the kind of stuckness I was in. But when you're doing something solo, I create some things that are my own narratives or my own stories, or something that's a little bit off the kind of normal track of client work. You want affirmation from outside, and the risk of sharing it and getting that criticism of, I don't like this, it doesn't make sense, can shut down a project. And I think that ego has to be checked in those ways, because I don't think anybody makes something for everybody to enjoy or everybody to want. You have to be comfortable with the idea that some people are not going to like things. And that can usually propel me to just release something or push it out or share it with a small group of people and get honest feedback, and try to not let it bruise my ego. It often does a little bit, but that usually wanes in time, and I'm back to it and feel more enthusiastic. But it's hard to share. It's hard to feel, here's part of me, please take it apart if you so feel, but there's no expectation of the response, and that risk is scary.
Well, for sure, I wouldn't recommend getting into a mastermind or a group or any of that where somebody's, I mean, you use the phrase, take this apart. And maybe that was just a handy phrase in the moment, but like just putting a little moment on, if that's somebody's idea of giving helpful information about a project, to take it apart, it's like, ooh, no. I've always said that I don't align with the phrase tough love, because if the love has to be tough, it ain't really love. If it sounds like what someone's inner critic sounds like, that's not love. That's fear-based. Get your shit together and kick fear's ass and let's go. And No. I mean, there's nothing I've ever found in the psychological literature about human motivation that says screaming at people or telling them to, in essence, get themselves together in a really harsh way is effective. It's effective only if people are threatened at the ego and identity level. Oh my God, I'd better fix this because otherwise this person won't like me. But that's ego identity. Ultimately, what we want is to integrate feedback like that and go, okay, so this person is suggesting something, not to take it down, but to rise it up. That's the value that I get from a mastermind group, is that if somebody says, I don't know if that idea is going to work, here's the concern I have, they're not saying that because it's like, God, Kay, I mean, why did you even think that was going to work? Or it's not going to work unless you do a lot more than that. You better get it together. Nobody's delivering anything like that. They're trying to help me shape something, to iterate and to make it even better. And that is definitely something that I think is important in terms of how we talk to ourselves, and also how others speak to us, or how we allow others to speak to us.
I think part of a small point of clarification, when I say take things apart in audio, I literally mean this track, these things, just the kind of looking at the parts of things and then finessing on that. But yes, I also probably subconsciously meant, like, go ahead, criticize me all you will. I'm finally over myself and ready for it, and not really over myself and not really ready for it. And I don't take the criticism too kindly well. But I think that there is part of the process is accepting that, pushing it back out and saying, I'm going to get feedback on what I do, regardless if I ask for it or not. This is an environment in which I can actually know that by asking for the feedback, checking in with somebody, expressing my fear or my frustration is always going to lead to reenacting those habits and getting me through whatever the moment might be that I need to keep moving forward. The risk is worth the reward.
Yeah. And we all flail. And, particularly since this conversation is so oriented around community, I think that's the benefit. And I talk about that in the Courage Habit, where, the first time that I ever ran a group course, there were some bumps, and my perfectionist pattern was running, and I didn't even realize it. And I happened to talk to a friend who had run multiple courses. And part of the reason my perfectionist pattern was running was because one person, maybe two, I can't remember, but just a very small minority. It was like 60 people in the course or something like that. One person decided they wanted to quit and wanted a refund. And the perfectionist in me went, oh my God, like, it's an awful course. I must have done it wrong. All this stuff. And his friend had to remind me, every business has a refund rate built, Target has a refund policy, they expect to get those. It doesn't mean that, think of the last time you returned something to Target. It didn't mean that the product was bad. It might've meant that you just didn't need it, or you wanted something different. And my pattern was running without my even realizing it. Having somebody else to remind me of that was yeah. So it's so helpful to have those people who point out the things we might not have been thinking of, in service to us moving to another level emotionally or with a project.
And I think there's also, statistics are great. I like looking at things and seeing how many people are impacted by something, following something, liking something. There's all sorts of numbers that we can put together and showcase our work and say, look, people like it, just generally like it. but we seem how to miss the positive statistic, and we often focus and give a lot more credence to the negative statistic. And I think that can just be a drag. If we accept it more directly, there's always going to be both in every equation, then I think that we're a little bit more human, that we know that everything we put out there, and sometimes the criticism isn't that valuable, regardless if it's positive or negative, just a thumbs up or a thumbs down. But I do think that there is value in recognizing you're getting a big spectrum of feedback, and it's all one big quotation. It's not one part of it is more highlighted than another part. It's how you react to the feedback that is the important part for your project.
Absolutely. I was recently listening to the Tim Ferriss podcast, and he had Seth Godin on. And Seth Godin shared an anecdote about Joni Mitchell. 3 names here. And Joni Mitchell apparently had this one part of her career where she was wildly successful, and she had turned out a couple of albums that, you know, everybody kind of knows the Joni Mitchell style. But she turned out a couple of different albums that were, had the same sort of style, and they were all well received. And Seth Godin tells the story of how Joni Mitchell, just as an artist, was she was winning. And yet she decided to go into the studio and go, I'm going to create something that's completely different than anything I ever created before. And of course, when it came out, people are going, what's this? Because it's not what they expected from Joni Mitchell. So the takeaway that I got from that story was, in essence, that the external feedback that you get can never matter as much as the internal process that we are engaged in. It's a reinforcement of that idea. And that we're always engaging with both when we bring our work or ourselves, whatever process we happen to be in, whether it's a personal process, like I am actively looking at my life to become more aligned with my most courageous self, or a project like a sound engineering project. I'm in a process within myself where I'm trying to feel into my intuition, my knowing, my sense of being, aligning with my values. And then other people are providing feedback externally. And just because the feedback is positive doesn't always mean that's in somebody's best interest. That was my takeaway from the Joni Mitchell story, because what she clearly saw in herself, and why she's an artist, from the 60s, 70s, and we're still talking about her all these years later, is because she did what I think all timeless artists do, which is they iterate. She wasn't about, I need my points from the general public. She wasn't about, I need my record sales. She was about, when I go within the sovereignty of myself, what do I need to do to continue to iterate as an artist? And I can take the public's feedback. Sure. Of course, I'm sure she's aware, or was aware of what it was, but the higher value was what her own internal process was.
I hope that we can all have success like Joni Mitchell. I think if we could all have that luxury of being able to put out something and it go wildly successful or moderately successful, and feel like, I could do something different. Like, the confidence in that is a really great lesson to strive for.
Well, it's hugely courageous.
Well said. I want to wrap up our conversation and talk about next steps. So where do we go from here? What's the step if people feel that they are developing these habits, and there's obviously iterations, like you say, to keep doing those habits, and there's new challenges that come along. But going forward, what do you suggest for people going forward who feel like they have this energy, it's working out for them, they feel like they've really developed their courageous self, and they're deploying it with reckless abandon and feeling really great about it? What are the next steps?
I love the phrase reckless abandon. The loveliest thing about arriving at that kind of a place, it's the roller coaster ride of life. It's, in essence, stepping into living life as a game, which, when I am most aligned with my most courageous self, and I hear you doing that too, it's like problems become opportunities. Sticky situations become space for curiosity and creativity and experimentation. I'll give the example that, this pandemic year, a whole lot of different business systems that I've done the same way for the entire time I've been in business I am completely rewriting them. I just decided, hey, it's a pandemic year. I might have clung to the old ways of doing things in the past. Not really clung, but just relied on them because they were the things that worked in the past. Well, now everything is in such disarray that really it's like, who knows what's going to work in terms of getting the work out to people, enrolling for programs, the way that I want to show up on social media, things like that. So let's just try a bunch of different stuff. Let it be a year of experiments. And we actually have something we say in the Courageous Living Coach certification when we teach the coaching skill set, because we're very experiential in teaching it, which is it's all just an experiment, because it is. It's all just an experiment. So when you are getting to a place where it feels like less of a struggle to consciously align with your most courageous self, because at the beginning it's like, okay, I'm trying to do something different. It's harder at the beginning to get the wheels in motion. Once you feel like you've got some level of flow with it, the flavor of life changes. It starts becoming looking around and going, wow, like what else is there for me? Days when you're complaining, I notice in myself more of a flavor of, at first, yeah, critic, God, Kate, you're complaining. And then I kind of, okay, hold on a second. Like, I'm complaining, but it's kind of silly. What do I want to be grateful for? Do I really want to be so frustrated about this or that thing in this moment? It just becomes easier to laugh it off, not take it personally. And in that way, there's more joy. There's more, this is good. There's more, I don't know why this comes to me in this moment, but the feeling I have when my daughter is sitting on my lap and I just kind of put my nose and smell her hair, which just feels like connection, even though there was no fancy effort behind that moment. There's more presence and there's more of a sense of being aligned with who you really are. And then the stuff that comes shakes you less. Doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. It's just, it shakes you less. And that to me is the beauty of doing this work.
I think there's also value in enjoying the simple things, because life is full of simple things. There's an abundance of simple things to be grateful for. And they could be as simple as interacting with nature in a way that you like, or interacting with friends in the way you like. But life is an endless series of really simple, wonderful events.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think gratitude is another thing that can be habitual, especially when people are suffering. It's really hard to think of what you would want to be grateful for. I can imagine someone going through this pandemic year and going, well, what's there to be grateful for here?
Yeah.
How about grateful that you survived? Grateful that you are, I look at the things like, just grateful for the sky, grateful for air in my lungs, grateful for my health, grateful for food, grateful that even if there are people who are suffering, I'm grateful that there are so many helpers and people who want to make it better. There's just an endless number of things to be grateful for. Turn your attention to them and they start to reveal themselves to you.
Well, I'm grateful for your book. I'm grateful for your time. I'm also really grateful that I have all these tools. I can go forward and hopefully have more positive impact on things that I do. So thank you, Kate, for all of
you already are.
That's right. We've already started. Once you've taken your first step, you're already on the way.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Courage Habit podcast. And thanks to Kate Swoboda for joining me. You can find her book, The Courage Habit, wherever you buy your books. And please shop local when you can. You can also find out information about her, the Courageous Living Coach certification program, and other resources at yourcourageouslife.com.
And you can find out more about Andy and his work at audioephemera.com. That's audio ephemera, EPHEMERA.com.
This was the last episode of the Limited Series podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast to get all the episodes. Thank you so much for joining our conversation, and we hope it encouraged you to build your courageous life.